Thanks, Mayor Given. So yes, I'll be talking a little bit more regionally and locally than our last presenters who did a good job of kind of setting you guys up on what the macro and national level trends are looking like. So we'll get started with kind of some baseline statistics for Grande Prairie that a lot of you will be familiar with already. Obviously, our population, we had a recent census come out at a little over 63,000. Working with some of our data providers right now, we actually think we're probably somewhere closer to 66,000 by the end of this year for population, and a lot of that's holding up with some of the population trends that we're seeing and the growth we're seeing in the residential side. On the population growth, we have been outpacing national levels of growth by almost 3 times at 2.8%. Nationally is averaged about 1%, and Alberta comes in at about 2.2%. So by all major metrics, we're doing fairly well on the population side. And then on the household income side, we're also exceptionally high. We're about 50% higher than the national average and a little over 10% higher than the Alberta average for median household incomes. We're also one of the youngest cities in Canada. For cities with more than 10,000 people, there are few that come close to our level. We're almost a full 10 years younger than the national average and close to 5 years younger than the provincial average within Alberta, which gives us some unique population and unique challenges that we have. However, with this young population, we also have very affordable housing. So unlike areas in the U.S. and other areas in Canada that have been depressed with their labor markets having high unemployment and low wages, we've been fairly the opposite over the last 10 years. And even during the recession, we fared fairly well. As of last month, we're sitting at about $295,000 for the average resale value of a house in Grande Prairie. So that's not new construction. That is all homes that have been sold. New homes are a little bit closer to $380,000 for average sale price. A snapshot of where we are in Alberta as far as the size of the city. We're sitting in 7th. However, as I just said, with some of the numbers we've seen recently, where we think we're actually probably closer to number 5 in population right now. And we won't see that until our next census comes out, I think, next year. But when that does, I think we should have a positive increase in population. So looking at population, oftentimes we get asked every time there's a correction in oil prices, how Grande Prairie is fared. And there's some misperceptions out there, especially on the national level of how tightly tied we are to the commodity market. In 2015, I got a call from a investment bank out of Toronto asking me to substantiate a 20% drop in population in Grande Prairie after they saw the they'd heard rumors, they'd saw the energy prices go down. So I'm happy to report that within our division, our census division here, we've never seen a year of negative population growth over the last 15 years. There's not a single one on record through a recession. We have seen interprovincial and intra-provincial migration have people leave the city, so we have seen people leave. However, we have a very strong natural population growth, and that's basically births minus deaths. We've continued to set records every single year over the last 15 years with increased births. So we have a fairly sustainable base of population. The migration that we do see, when we see people coming into the city interprovincially, largely that is in the age group of 20 to 35. Intraprovincially, which is people moving within the province or within divisions, we almost without exception see people leave this region to go elsewhere. Part of that is education based in that demographic. Largely that's the 20 to 25 that we see leave. And it skews to female that we believe are largely higher education. We believe there's another factor in there with respect to people taking jobs in Calgary and Edmonton as they progress through their careers.
Brian, sorry, before you leave that slide, and we sort of talked about interjecting as we went along, can you just speak to the international migration that you see in 2015, 2016? That's the orange there. Looks pretty significant and looks like it's of growing significance to our region.
Sure. On the international, I can't give you a lot as far as the origination of where people are coming from. However, it is certainly a growing portion of population that we're seeing. The major sources or the major levers of population growth for us, though, are interprovincial and births. Those, by far and away, are the largest source of population increases for the city.
Sure. Thank you. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Brian. You gave an update. My question is that when you get international, you count those work permit guy or the visa on the as a student? They added in there, or the real people like proper immigration? Those.
Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of detail with the statistics. We get a very high level set of data that doesn't distinguish where they came from or what type of immigrant they are. So taking a look at the residential market here, this is showing back to 2010. Average price is the blue line that goes across. So you can see it corresponds with the economic conditions at the time. 2010 was a relatively slow year, coming off 2008-9 when commodity prices did see significant declines, and then we saw the trend back up through 2011 into 14. And then again, when commodity prices went down, it did follow the market with that. However, we didn't see near the decrease in the average home price in the last decline, as we didn't have as significant inventories of new homes and new lots on the market, which aided in supporting home prices. Right now, although we are seeing things stabilize, general consensus through speaking with a number of the different home builders and developers is that it is a bit of a challenge right now to get financing, not only at the retail buyer level, but also to build spec homes and to develop land. Although Grande Prairie is a brighter spot within Alberta, we do get lumped in with the greater Alberta market and the greater Canadian market, which is a challenge in that you have to overcome a number of obstacles when you're hearing the headwinds, and all the majority of the data that you see nationally is Alberta level. It's not Grande Prairie level. It takes a lot of extra effort to try and convince a lender that Grande Prairie is a good market to put their capital to work in, which is something that we've been spending a lot more time lately trying to convince the lenders that there is a substantial difference here. So on the housing starts this year, as of October, we had 151. CMHC is predicting about 290 next year. That's predicated on oil prices and the lending environment at the time. If oil prices or oil and gas prices are able to sustain themselves at this level or within a range of this level, we should see increased confidence and increased pressures on buying next year with the capital budgets that we're seeing in the oil and gas industry, which I'm going to touch on a lot more later on in the presentation.
Mr. Nicolai.
Can you just clarify that? You're saying that CMHC's prediction of housing starts in Grande Prairie next year, 290 combined?
They're anticipating 290 to 330 next year. They're low and high scenarios, which would be up between 50 and I think 75% over this year.
And that's a blend of single family and multifamily?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Minhas, you're going to have to turn on your microphone. This is webcast, so if you don't turn it on, all the people watching get is silence. So turn the microphone on and pull it a little bit towards you there. There you go.
So this when you're talking just the city part, not the county around.
That's correct. Those are city starts.
Thank you.
So moving on to building permits, this is a little bit of a messy chart, but it goes back 4 years into 2014. So the darkest bar on the right-hand side of each month is 2017. So far this year, every month but February, we've seen permits increase month over month. Largely, these are being driven by commercial building and commercial alteration permits. We're starting to see, we have seen a little bit of pickup on the residential side, but not substantially. Industrial has not had a strong year, although we are getting indications that next year should see some more new starts on the industrial side. So by and large, it's a relatively good news story. We've had a lot of conversations with a number of different commercial industrial tenants over the last number of months, and we think we should see building permits start to increase significantly in the spring and over this winter. So moving back, looking at the different household incomes across the country. So we selected a few different markets on the eastern part of the country, and then a few in Alberta and the western part of the country, just to give you guys a rough idea of the differentiation between Grande Prairie and other communities. As I said before, in Alberta, we're about 10% higher than the Alberta median income and close to 50% higher than the Canadian median household income, and you can see everything in between. And we really only have one contemporary in Western Canada, which is Fort St. John, which has similar levels of median household incomes. When you look at Southern Alberta, Medicine Hat and Lethbridge, they're in the low 70s for median household incomes. And when you start looking at the cost of housing in those markets, they're not substantially different than what they are in Grande Prairie. So when you're looking to buy a house, it's quite a bit cheaper on percentage terms in Grande Prairie than it is elsewhere.
I see Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Just on that note, Brian, I think we've chatted about this in the past, but I don't know if there's a messaging piece that the city could do. But one of the things that always hits home to me is when we talk to people that Grande Prairie is not an affordable place to live. Yet we have one of the highest medium incomes and one of the lowest average house prices in Alberta. Calgary's last month was $454,000 was the average house price in Calgary. And so I don't know if, how we get in front of that a little bit more, I guess, Brian. I'm not sure if you got some thoughts, but I just feel like that's something, there's a misconception in our market locally that it's not an affordable place to live, and all the indicators show that it's just the opposite of that. So do you have anything to add to that, Brian? Or?
Yeah, there's actually a fairly significant study that comes out by the province of Alberta. It used to be every 2 years. It's been a little bit more sporadic of late. It's called the Alberta Spatial Price Survey. It's something we do report on in some of our marketing documents. But one of the key things that it does is that it takes, I think, 270 different things that people buy, and it includes the cost of housing, the cost of taxes, pretty much any you can think of that you need to live. And it uses Edmonton as a benchmark in the index. So Edmonton is 100, and then everything else is benchmarked off of that. When you benchmark Grande Prairie, we're about 2% more expensive to live than Edmonton. And that doesn't factor in income. So just the costs are about 2% higher. Our incomes are 10% higher than the Alberta average, 50% higher than the Canadian average. So when you look at the costs on a percentage of income, we're exceptionally affordable place to live, although the absolute numbers sometimes tell us very slightly different story, as it is only about 2% difference in costs.
Mr. City Manager?
Just add to that response for Councillor Plott. That is definitely something that we're concentrating on in the development of our strategic messaging, our strategic communications. We're seeing it as well as we try to recruit people into Grande Prairie. It's traditionally been a difficult place to recruit into. And in large part, when you talk to people about why they're declining, or talk to headhunters about why they're getting an expression of no interest, many, many times it's because the remote nature or the remote visibility of the community on a map connotes a high cost of living that people can't get their heads around. So that type of messaging is going to become increasingly important for us.
Mr. Glavin.
So moving into our labor force statistics, we used to have great labor force statistics, and I won't go into too much of a complaint with the Statistics Canada here, although we have come to agreement that they are going to be providing city-level data again within the next few weeks. So by this time next year, I should have great city data. I'm hoping before the end of the month I have great city data again. But for right now, we have what we have. Which is essentially all of Western Alberta that we get lumped into for an unemployment rate. So right now, the unemployment rate's at about 5.8%. Historically, Grande Prairie has usually been 1 to 2% below the economic region, which is what we're looking at right now. So if we had Grande Prairie specific stats, I would expect it to be somewhere in the 3.8 to 4.8% for unemployment right now, which is starting to marry with a lot of the things we're hearing from industry right now, and having a tough time sourcing labor. which is becoming an increasing problem. And we're starting to see a substantial uptick in flight traffic in and out of Grande Prairie to correspond with bringing workers to the region. So I won't spend a lot of time on this statistic, but this kind of speaks to the diversity of the labor force. And unfortunately, this is Western Alberta. This is not Grande Prairie specific. But when you look at where the concentration of labor is and what people do, our largest is forestry, fishing, mining, and oil and gas. So forestry and oil and gas would be far and away the biggest component of that, followed by trade, which is retail trade, which is all the different retail that we have here in Grande Prairie. Grande Prairie is one of the largest drivers of Western Alberta economic region. So these numbers do have some reflection of Grande Prairie. They're just not Grande Prairie specific. Followed by construction, healthcare, and accommodation and food services, which speak to the kind of the regional trading area that we serve, as these are in higher concentration here than they are in other areas. So looking at the vacancies in the different sectors of the economy here. So this is looking at different products we have with office, industrial, retail. And going back to the peak back in 2014 when we had the lowest vacancies to 2017, and this is all as of July. So this is a snapshot in time that we use to benchmark the city. So we've seen decreases largely year over year in many categories. Specifically industrial has seen a lot of absorption in the Richmond Industrial Park. There's not been really one single key tenant in there. It's been a lot of smaller shops that have been absorbed. On the office side, there's only about 4 buildings that are causing us to have a significant increase in vacancy, and those are the Sterling Centre out on the west end. We have the Higson building on the south end across from Eastlink Centre, and then we had renovations that were going on in Windsor Court, which displaced some tenants in there for a period of time. However, a lot of that I expect to be washed away by this time next year. On the retail side, shopping centers, some of this is based on some new construction and vacancy, but Westgate East, or the Westgate Centre development, which is where Bed Bath & Beyond is, there's some vacancy in there in the new CRUs they built. Freestanding retail, so that's a place like Staples, for example. We've seen absorption in that area. Downtown retail has been relatively steady. And big box has also been steady. However, this is going to change next year with Sears and potentially wholesale sports buildings being included in those numbers. On a percentage basis, some of that could be offset with new development, as we are expecting a number of new developments to occur over the next 12 months.
Ask a question about this?
Of course, Councillor Bressing.
You know what our vacancy... Oh, sorry, I just saw it. Sorry, never mind.
Okay.
All right. So this map is a relatively conservative map of our trading area. And I say conservative in that we made the area small-ish to be credible, as we've had difficulty over the years convincing multinational retailers on the size of the Grande Prairie market. Oftentimes they go into a community and they're looking at a 20-minute drive time or a 30-minute drive time. And when you apply those metrics to Grande Prairie, they don't produce the metrics they're looking for. But the difference in Grande Prairie is that there's not a lot of options in northwestern Alberta and northeastern BC, or to a lesser extent in the Northwest Territories, to go shopping. And then if you need services, there's a good chance you're coming to Grande Prairie to get them, whether you have to drive 2 hours or not, let alone 20. So this gives you a sense of where people are coming from. We do know that we get people far beyond this this kind of delineation into the Northwest Territories. However, as we were using this tool to sell to other retailers, we chose to use a relatively small area. This consists of about 280,000 people.
Thanks very much, Brian. I've got 2 councillors in the queue. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. This just goes back to the retail. I know there's there's a consideration for a healthy vacancy rate. Certainly in residential, is there a healthy vacancy rate in commercial and retail as well, or is that?
I don't know if any landlord would consider a vacancy healthy, but we like to have some choice so that we have, if we have a new tenant coming in here, that there's some place for them to go. So typically, a lot of people would say 5% would be roughly a healthy vacancy rate. I don't think there's a magic number, but you don't want 0. 0 is not a good place to be for attracting people to the city. You don't want 10 because landlords don't want to develop, or it's a more broader signal there that something's wrong.
Something very wrong. Thank you.
Councillor Palat.
Thank you. I think to Eunice's question there, I think 5% seems to be the number that most lenders kind of put on a pro forma anyways when they're looking at it. So it's probably a healthy number. I guess, Brian, I'm just kind of curious if you can speak on what the vacancy rate in Grande Prairie is as far as apartment rentals and then general vacancy for residential, and also hotel occupancy rates. It's just because they do play a big factor in projecting potentially residential starts, and kind of the heart of the city, which direction it's going, because those are kind of the first indicators of lots of economic development, or lag indicators as well.
Sure. So on the residential side, last year, CMHC is the only one who tracks the market formally. We have informal tracking that a number of people do, and the city also does some tracking on vacancy rates. But CMHC last October released their vacancy rate, which was about 20% at that time, which unfortunately was somewhat of a timing issue, that it came out at 20% and that there were a couple new buildings that had just come online that had not had the opportunity to lease out yet. So it wasn't a true measure of the market at that time. We think it'll be down substantially. Our numbers are probably going to be closer to the 8 to 10%, we think, this year. As a lot of that inventory has been absorbed. A lot of the new inventory out there has been getting absorbed a lot faster than the older inventory that hasn't seen reinvestment. So I think that'll push some people to reinvest in their properties over the next little bit, but we'll also start pushing people into to be buyers. And I think we're starting to see that now that rental rates are starting to go up again.
And hotel?
The hotel occupancy, as of August, I think we are around 60% by all indications that we've had from hoteliers. We're probably getting closer to that high 60, 70% now. It depends on the night of the week. On the weekends, we tend to be slower, but during the week, if you searched Expedia right now, there's probably a number of hotels that are sold out for tonight. And that's been the case for the last number of weeks.
Brian, before you leave the retail trade area, I just had a thought arising in terms of risks to our local economy. That map that just showed our retail trade area, the west side across into the BC border, is obviously an important part of our local economy. And it just struck me that, was it retail trade did you have it in that sort of circle chart as a part of our contributor to employment labor force? So if that 12% of our labor force is focused on essentially retail sales, how big a risk factor would changes to provincial sales taxes be on our local economy? Has administration ever undertaken an analysis, or is that something that could be found out?
It's certainly something that could be found out. We haven't spent a lot of time on it. I would suggest that unless there was a substantial differentiation between the provincial tax rates, and it would have to be more than parity between the two, that people are still going to come to Grande Prairie for retail due to the critical mass and selection. If you're going to go to Walmart in Dawson Creek or in Fort St. John, you're still going to go to Walmart in Dawson Creek, Fort St. John, but you're not going to go to Costco, and it's highly unlikely a store like Costco or Bed Bath & Beyond or HomeSense is going to set up shop in one of those communities just due to their trading areas being low and not wanting to cannibalize their existing markets. So I think there is risk in that there's potential that it decreases the frequency of trips, but I don't think it's something that would start to see us see a lot of leakage of stores into those other communities.
Thank you.
So just looking at the size of the retail market, these are a few headline statistics. These are almost 2 years old now, so there will be a little bit of growth. However, right now we see about $3.7 billion of retail spending in Grande Prairie every single year. About $532 million of that comes from outside the Grande Prairie region. there's about 4.06 million square feet of retail space. And to put that in perspective, a community of our side really only justifies about 1.8 to 2 million square feet of retail in the actual city. So there's more than double the amount of space that we need to service just the people of Grande Prairie, and that's very telling of the size of the market that Grande Prairie serves. At the time of the study, we had 958,000 square feet of retail demand that was residual. So that was calculated as demand or additional square footage that could be supported. That's a tricky number to put a lot of stock in the sense that, you know, it is subject to economic circumstances at the time. It's subject to differences in patterns of spending with consumers. However, in 2018, I think you're probably going to see 200 to 250,000 square feet of that number come off with new construction on the retail side that we're expecting to see come over the next few months. So it is coming. We expect to see more retail demand. However, it's changing. Things are looking different. You know, you had Best Buy and Future Shop last time I think I was in front of council to have this discussion. You only have Best Buy now, and I think you're going to start to see smaller footprints, and that's a general trend across the retail spectrum. So the types of tenants like Sears out there, they don't exist in any significant quantity anymore. So those types of buildings, just like you saw the mall have to demise that space into a number of smaller spaces, that's likely going to be the trend you're going to see with any of the large spaces that become vacancies over the next little while. So one of the major stories that you'll all be familiar with here is the Grande Prairie Regional Hospital. But this hospital is a great economic tool for us, and it's a key piece to the quality of life. Not just in the sense that we have a nice new hospital, but it allows people to stay here for treatment and is a decision, part of the decision in staying in Grande Prairie versus moving to Edmonton or Calgary if you have a loved one that needs long-term treatment in a facility like this. So aside from the quality of life, this new facility with the new services that we're going to have, we did an economic study where we partnered with the Chamber of Commerce, the County of Grande Prairie, MD of Greenview, and a number of other stakeholders. In that study, we show about 507 new jobs that are going to be created by this hospital that don't exist today that we're going to have to recruit. Largely those are highly technical and skilled positions that are going to be relatively high income, that are going to add to demand for the different services, whether it be retail, housing, or any of the other professional services within the community. But one of the major headline numbers here is the $276 million increase annually to the province's GDP that's going to be generated by this hospital, which is a huge figure. And I think we're all pretty excited to see that come online.
Mr. Lavin, I've got another question before we get too far. Councillor Platt.
Thank you. I guess my question is just one slide back, I guess, Brian. Just, I don't know how we quantify it or if there's metrics out there we can start looking at. I'm just wondering what we think the Amazons of the world of how that's going to affect retail space moving forward, and if there's any way we can actually know how much of it's already happening within our city limits and how much, you know, through mail or anything, if there's any way we can track or trace that. But if there's some think tank levels at a bigger picture that have, I know a few of us have had a conversation about what that could do to retail space moving forward. And I don't know if it's a major concern, little concern, you know, where we're at with it, I guess.
I don't have any hard numbers to give you on that, but the kind of the anecdotal evidence would be things like Future Shop and then Best Buy's new formats being dramatically smaller in footprint than they are today. As far as what that looks like on the broader market long term, that's still somewhat of an unknown. Within industry, you have a player like Amazon right now that is, you know, they hundreds of billions of dollars in market cap and doesn't have to turn a profit to get it right now. That's a tough thing for retailers to compete with. So until that kind of shakes out, it's kind of new territory right now. I couldn't give you a great sense of where that's going. This is just a list of some of the services that'll be on the Grande Prairie Hospital here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, and I'll move into the oil and gas sector. So the oil and gas sector in Grande Prairie has been a fairly positive story. Even during the recession, we saw quite a bit of investment. We're lucky in our geographic position here to be at the center of the Montney and right beside the Duvernay, two of the largest plays in North America and two of the only plays that are attracting attention from investors. This year, so I'll move on to the next slide. So this is a picture, this is a table of the top 8 producers that are Montney focused producers. So these companies are producing in the Grande Prairie area, based out of the Grande Prairie area. And these are 2 of the line items they have on their budget, which is the drilling and the facilities expenditures. So between 2016 and 2017, we've seen a 158% increase in drilling budgets and a 73% increase in facilities budgets, which is dramatic. You can see it on the roads within Grande Prairie right now, which I'll cover a little bit further in this presentation. And although I didn't have a lot of space to fill this in with 2014 numbers, these are higher numbers than we saw in 2014 for both drilling and facilities investment. In 2014 was largely believed to be the peak of the boom, or of the last boom. So we're certainly seeing a significant return of confidence into the area with these budgets.
Mr. Nicolai.
Brian, if I can just interject, just given the context of this discussion as being 2018 budget, one of the things that we need to be prepared for as a municipality is this kind of development that's occurring in the community. Both the hospital with the 500 and some odd new people moving into the community and the new dynamics that facility will cause in the community, and this kind of radical increase in the pace of activity in the oil and gas sector nearby. So you'll see some of this manifest into budget discussions as we talk about planning and development, roads and engineering, recreational facilities, and even the consequential social issues that arise when we see this kind of activity.
Yeah, so I was hoping to have the forecast for 2018 from the different producers, although most of them aren't going to be delivering their budget forecasts until mid-November, which is more or less right now, but there's not much out there yet as far as what the capital budgets are looking like, although largely the indications are we're going to see the same or increased from most of the different producers out there. So for example, this year 7Gen was around 1.6 billion was their high end of what they thought they'd spend. They actually spent 1.65. So they pulled a little bit of money into that budget. Tourmaline, the second largest spender, is anticipating increasing their budget next year. They're one of the few that do have their capital out for next year, which will be close to a 10% increase that they're expecting to put out there. And we've seen similar guidance from a number of the other producers. So this is just another way we track activity in the oil and gas sector. So this is drilling licenses by oil or gas, of the 2 types of commodities. And you can see the substantial uptick in the amount of licenses that are being pulled for oil this year, and a fairly significant increase on the gas side. All of that activity is within the Montney, by and large, in the Grande Prairie area. We don't pull the BC statistics. They're a little harder to get at than the Alberta ones, but we understand that they're also seeing significant increase in activity in the Fort St. John and Dawson areas. So this is the truth teller of the licenses. This is the completions data. So this is, you have from the time that you pull a license, you have 12 months to complete that. Our completions data is showing a significant increase in completions over last year. We're also up over 2015, and we expect a lot of those 2017 licenses that we showed in the last table, they'll start to be drilled over the coming months here. So we should start to see them being pulled into completions data shortly. And given that a lot of the budgets that I reviewed in advance of this are close to spending their entire 2017 budgets, I would suspect that most of those licenses will be drilled before the end of the year. And this kind of starts to substantiate our license and drilling data. This is the overdimensional vehicle traffic through the city. So these are permits that are tracked by the province that we then pull in through enforcement services. This year is the largest year on record for overdimensional vehicles. So this includes things like rig moves, buildings or facility components that are moving through the facility. Essentially anything that has a wide load or a pilot car with it is included in this statistic. So this is the traffic count.
Sorry, Brian, before you get too far away, Councillor Clayton, you just have to turn on your microphone.
In regards to overdimensional vehicle traffic, do we have any indication if it's moving into the market or out of the market?
We don't get it directionally. And if you look at 2015, we had some big months in 2015 in the first quarter, which were, the way we understand it, via overdimensional vehicles coming back into the Grande Prairie, so pulling equipment out of the field and pulling it back into the yards. And right now, we understand it to be the opposite, in that this is equipment going into the field, and that's substantiated with the substantial increase in facilities budgets that we're seeing, the substantial increase in drilling activity.
And Councillor Palat.
Just on the, in light of that, we're, I don't know how many years away from maybe not having a provincial highway, like, excuse the bypass going through the city. Will these numbers be greatly changed once the bypass is no longer where there's a truck route outside of the city limits? And would we still be able to capture it? Because I think this is a great chart for us to capture how much traffic flow is. I'm just worried if we have a bypass that maybe we don't get the same picture at some point in time.
There's no risk of that happening right now. Once they cross the municipal boundary, they're required to report. So if they're within the municipality of Grande Prairie, it's my understanding that they have to report, and we get that data. So this is a traffic count. This is 3 kilometers south of 68th Avenue on Highway 40. This is just showing two-way traffic every day. So this is the monthly average daily traffic. So there's some days that are substantially higher, some days that are substantially lower. But for October of 2017, we've broken pretty much, we've broken every record that we've had with traffic substantially. So in 2014, which was the previous record, we're 15% higher than we were then. And this goes back to showing just the amount of investment that we're seeing into the community, and that we've seen more investment this year than we've seen in 2014, which again was considered the peak of the last boom.
Brian, I want to make sure that I clearly understand that number, because this is important as we get to advocacy with respect to Highway 40. So it's 1,400 trips per day, or two-way trips?
This is 1,400 trips per day. So this is direction and traffic in both directions. So this is 14,000 unique movements of traffic on that road.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Getting close to the end here, but with the agriculture, Alberta's second largest crop producing region. We have 13.6 of all Alberta's cropland is in northwestern Alberta. This is a little harder to track just within our immediate area, but within northwestern Alberta, we have about 14% of all the agricultural land. We've not seen a lot of significant changes in the agricultural industry over the last number of years. We've seen farms get bigger. We've seen genetics get better and yields increase. But as far as industry, we've not seen a lot of changes within the municipal boundaries of Grande Prairie. On the travel side, right now we have 2 new hotels under construction, the 4-Point Sheraton on 68th Avenue, just south of the Eastlink Center, and a new Podolin Hotel in Center West on the west side of the city. Hotel occupancy rates year to date are up over last year, about 10% up over the same period last year. And airport passengers are up about 4% year to date. However, just in October alone, they're up closer to 10%, which kind of coincides with new flights that are being added in Grande Prairie as well to keep up with the demand.
Perhaps just on that note, I should point out to Council that for the first time ever, Brian Glavin, as Manager of Economic Development, will be placed on the Airport Commission as a voting member. And that was a very intentional strategy that manifests from the last Council, looking to ensure that we can assert into the Airport Commission the kinds of skill sets and expertise that the city needs in order to properly help to manage that strategic asset. Economic development was considered to be a valuable attribute to insert onto the commission, and that will happen during this term of the commission. So that's underway.
Mr. Glavin.
All right, and to finish it off here, we'll end in forestry. This region produces 40% of Alberta's pulp and 50% of its timber. So it's not necessarily Grande Prairie, but this region within Alberta. Grande Prairie is home to 4 large mills. We have Weyerhaeuser, Canfor, Norbord, and International Paper. If anybody missed it, Weyerhaeuser used to have pulp and solid lumber. They sold their pulp off to International Paper, who now operates that mill. And it employs approximately 3,300 people in our industry, whether directly or indirectly. So it's a quite a significant portion of the region's population that works within forestry. And with that, I'll be happy to take any other questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Glavin. I see Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Brian, just touching on the forestry aspect, I think Kevin O'Toole is looking for a more global perspective, but on the local perspective, the changes to the NAFTA agreements and tariffs to softwood lumber, have you had any discussions with Canfor located directly in the city as to what their thoughts or feelings are, or if they're nervous about it, or what their plan is moving forward?
So we have spoken with Canfor. We're in a somewhat fortunate position, or the best of a bad situation, that lumber prices are high right now, so that they're able to absorb some of the tariffs. However, that could change at any time if there was something that dramatically slowed U.S. housing or Canadian housing to a lesser extent. The forestry companies have made a concerted effort over the last number of years to diversify away from the U.S. market. However, it's still a significant portion of their exports and is very material to their outcomes. So I think that we're all hoping that they are able to find some sort of an agreement here with the U.S. Very soon. I know that they're filing a NAFTA challenge right now as we speak. But the short answer to your question is that lumber prices are strong right now, and that is helping them mitigate the increase in tariffs.
Thank you.
Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. I know that North America-wide malls are really struggling. I'm just curious, how's the Prairie Mall doing these days?
Yeah, the Prairie Mall is actually one of the strongest in Morguard's portfolio. Morguard is the company that owns it, and it's performed very well for them over the last number of years, including through the last downturn. So this mall is seeing a reinvestment, and obviously the new wing, the former Target side, has leased up the majority of its space with 3 new core tenants in there, and I know that they're close to signing leases with a number of the in the smaller bays. So this mall is not of significant concern. I think in the U.S. they had the big challenge was the oversaturation of malls in the U.S. That they're starting to come to terms with there now.
Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Brian, I'm just wondering with IP, I mean, it was I think that was in the last 12 months or so that took place. I've heard different stories. I'm just kind of wondering if you can maybe give an update of what IP's position of reinvestment in the local mill is. I've heard that they're looking at actually doing a fairly substantial reinvestment in this mill, but I'm not sure if you've heard anything that we can maybe be more quantified.
I don't have anything that would be solidly one way or the other on that this time.
Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Brian, just in regards to our retail vacancy spaces, any idea when the new Canadian Tire is going to come online and out on 116th? Obviously, they got to break ground and start building that big sucker, but that's going to leave a big open building at the current Canadian Tire space. So any idea where that's forecasted to be built in this upcoming budget term?
So I can't confirm, obviously, any of their building timelines. That's a corporate decision on their end. However, they have pulled a development permit at this time. To my knowledge, there's no building permit pulled, and until that time, we don't really have a solid indication of when they'll start construction on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nicolai.
Just if we're starting to finish up with Brian, I just thought I would remind council that this is a very, very strategic part of the city organization. This is where our appetite for commercial development, industrial development, and ultimately residential development manifests very, very clearly for those that are looking at doing business. Many communities in their strategy make statements like we're open for business or we're business friendly or other platitudes like that. One of the things that we will try to focus on as we move into strategic planning in February of this year or February of next year is trying to put some real framework around that so that this council's desire with regard to economic development and stimulating that kind of investment in the community can manifest in some very clear ways so the organization can line up behind that and assert itself properly. Brian has a great handle on the issues in the community right now, and there are areas of discretion. There are areas that we can work in more focused ways, and there are policies that we can pursue that would assist in economic development. We'll get at those during the strategy session as well.